We heard from Mom Somi about Jesus' walk up to the hill where he was to be crucified. By this point, he was physically tired, just exhausted, and needed help carrying the cross on which he would be crucified. So often when I think about Jesus' death, I think about the physical pain. I think about the crown of thorns which pierced his head. I think about that exhaustion, the deep thirst when he finally asked for something to drink. I think about the jagged nails driven through his hands and feet with nothing to dull the pain. I imagine the weight of his body hanging on those nails, the mind-numbing pain as his lungs would start to crush under the pressure. All that for a man who did nothing wrong. When I was reading the story again in preparation for this morning's message, I couldn't help but also feel the weight of the reactions and actions of everyone around Jesus. And I started to really feel that might be as heavy on Jesus' shoulders as the physical pain of which he had to endure. It all starts when he's having a meal with the people who were supposed to have been the closest to him. These 12 men were the ones who had traveled with him for the past 3 years. They had watched him come into his ministry and reveal himself as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Son of God. And yet one of them was willing to trade his life for a sack of money. We know the pain of betrayal. When someone betrays our actual life, even though we've done nothing wrong, but be a faithful friend to them, that must hurt. And then Jesus goes out to pray on the Mount of Olives, and he says to his disciples, please just stay up and pray with me. We read that he was just a stone's throw away from them, and he knelt down to pray. And we hear that he was in such deep anguish that as he was praying so hard, the sweat was falling to the ground like drops of blood. He's clearly not his usual, fairly calm and collected self. And even though he's going through all of that, probably in sight of his disciples, they just can't stay awake to be with him. We hear that they fall asleep. I mean, don't they even care? Then Peter, who's one of the closest people to Jesus, even out of the 12, and when Jesus is being put on trial and people recognize that Peter is associated to him and say, hey, aren't you one of that man's followers? Peter denies his association with Jesus. He says, no, I am not. And again, someone recognizes him and he denies the association. I don't know what you're talking about, he says. 3 times he denies knowing Jesus. I mean, can you imagine being betrayed again by someone who was afraid or possibly ashamed to be associated with you? The guards who were watching Jesus were also cruel. We read, the men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, prophesy, who hit you? And they said so many insulting things to him. The authorities of the time were jealous of him, and so they wanted to find any reason to get him away. I mean, he's done nothing but be selfless and speak the truth, and yet the people in power were threatened by him. He didn't deserve that. Herod was one of the rulers who interrogated him. We read that he was greatly pleased because for a long time he'd been wanting to see him. From what he'd heard about him, he hoped to see him perform some miracle. Can you imagine being Jesus in this situation? Here he's on trial, facing the death penalty, and Herod wants him to perform like a circus monkey. Is that fair? I know that I certainly wouldn't have reacted with the same kind of composure that Jesus did. He was quiet. He didn't react. He didn't take the bait. But everyone was standing there watching him. The teachers of the law were accusing him. Herod and his disciples mocked and ridiculed him. But despite all of this, Pilate still couldn't find anything to try Jesus with. In his eyes, he was an innocent man. And yet when he shared his findings to the crowd in front of him, what did they shout? Crucify him! Crucify him! They chose to set free a murderer and to have Jesus hang in his place. Crowds watched him carry his cross. Simon of Cyrene assisting him with the cross was probably one of the few moments of kindness and respite that Jesus experienced the whole time. They get to the top of the hill. They strip Jesus of all his clothes and then place bets to see who will be the one to get it. While he's there watching them, unclothed, he sees so much of his dignity just stripped away. And yet despite all of these soul-crushing moments, let alone the physical pain that he would have endured, we never see Jesus stop being Jesus. He never lashed out or said anything mean. He never did anything but continue to be kind. Jesus makes the comment while hanging on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And to the criminal hanging next to him or on another cross alongside him who says, "But this man has done nothing wrong. Why are they mocking him?" Jesus turns to him and says, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." How grateful are we that the one whose hands our fate and salvation rests in is so gracious and merciful. We may not have been at the crucifixion that day, but how often do we deny Jesus in our lives by the way that we talk and act? How often do we mock his offerings? Are there times when we are only interested in the miracles that Jesus can do for us? Or are we interested in what we can also do for him? And yet even when we are the worst versions of ourselves, Jesus still chose to die for us. John 15 verse 16 says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." We will never fully understand just how great the sacrifice of what Jesus did for us is. The physical pain, the emotional trauma that Jesus endured for all of us. He didn't need to go through it, but he did it for us. He did it for you, with his only motivation being that he loves you. Amen.